My name is Savannah Reed. I am 27 years old, and on a Tuesday night in November, I sat at the kitchen table in my childhood home and listened to my mother tell me she could not help me pay a $1,200 medical bill. The same woman who had written check after check totaling $84,000 for my brother's business over the last 3 years. The same business that had failed 6 months ago and left nothing behind. $1,200. That was all I needed. Figure it out yourself, she said. Then she got up from the table and went to bed. I sat there for a long time in the quiet of that kitchen. Then I stood up, walked down the hall, and stopped in front of my grandfather's old study. The safe was behind the bookshelf, exactly where it had always been. I knew the combination. My grandfather had given it to me 4 years earlier and told me to remember it. He said I would know when the time was right to use it. That night, I finally understood what he meant. I opened the safe. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name written on it in my grandfather's handwriting, and beneath it a single legal document that changed everything. But before I tell you what was inside that document, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me your country in the comments. Now, let's begin. In our family, the rules were never written down. They didn't need to be. Everyone already knew them. Tyler came first. Tyler always came first. My older brother was 4 years ahead of me, and from the time I was old enough to notice, I could see the difference in the way my parents treated us. Not dramatically, not cruelly, just consistently. Tyler got the bigger bedroom. Tyler got the newer car when he turned 17. Tyler's report cards were posted on the refrigerator. Mine were looked at briefly and set aside. My parents weren't bad people. I want to say that clearly. They were not unkind, but they had decided early on, without ever saying it out loud, that Tyler was the one with potential. And once a family decides something like that, it becomes the water everyone swims in. Nobody questions it. Nobody names it. It just is. My grandfather, Walter Reed, was the only person in our family who saw it differently. Grandpa Walter was my father's father, a quiet and careful man who had spent 40 years building and selling a small manufacturing business in Cincinnati. He had very little patience for pretense and very strong opinions about fairness. He used to sit with me on the back porch of this house, the house he had built himself, the house our family had lived in my entire life, and talk to me like I was worth listening to. He asked about my plans, my ideas, what I wanted for my future. He told me that working hard in private was more valuable than talking loudly in public. He also watched my parents and Tyler very closely, and I believe in his quiet way, he was keeping score. Tyler's business idea came 3 years ago, an online retail platform for specialty outdoor equipment. Tyler had no background in retail, no experience in logistics, and no business plan that anyone with financial sense would have called complete. But he had enthusiasm, and in our family, Tyler's enthusiasm had always been enough. My parents gave him $20,000 to start. When that ran out, they gave him $18,000 more for inventory. Then another $15,000 for a warehouse lease. Then $14,000 for a website redesign and marketing. Then, over the final year, 2 more transfers totaling $17,000 to cover operating costs as the business slowly bled out. $84,000 over 3 years. I did the math myself because no one in my family ever said the full number out loud. 6 months ago, Tyler shut the business down. There was nothing to show for it. No assets, no inventory, no recovered funds. Just a closed LLC and a family that moved forward as though the money had never existed. Nobody apologized. Nobody mentioned it. Tyler moved back into his old bedroom, and my parents treated him with the same warmth they always had. Life continued. I had been living on my own since I was 22. I had paid my own rent, my own groceries, my own car insurance, and every bill that came with being an adult without any financial help from my parents. I had never asked for much, because I had learned early that the answer would almost certainly disappoint me. But in October, I got sick. It was a respiratory infection that I let go too long because I kept telling myself I would get better on my own. By the time I went to the doctor, it had progressed enough to need a chest x-ray, a specialist visit, and a course of a treatment that my insurance covered most of, but not all of. The remaining balance came to $1,200. I had $340 in my checking account at that point. I had just paid rent. I had a payment plan option from the medical provider, but it came with interest and I was already stretched thin. I called my mother. I explained the situation carefully. I told her the exact amount. I told her I would pay her back within 3 months. I told her I was not asking for a gift, only a loan. She listened quietly. And then she said she was sorry, but money was tight. Right now, with everything going on. I did not say anything about the $84,000. I just said I understood. And I hung up. That evening, I drove back to my childhood home because I had left some of my winter clothes there the previous weekend. My mother offered me dinner and I sat at the kitchen table and tried once more, calmly and without any anger, explaining that I was struggling with this bill. Savannah, she said, in the measured tone she used when she had already made a decision and did not want to discuss it further. You're a grown woman. Figure it out yourself. She cleared her plate from the table and went upstairs. I sat in that kitchen for a long time after she left. The house was quiet. My father was away on a work trip. Tyler was in his room with the door closed. And I thought about my grandfather. Grandpa Walter had passed away 8 months earlier. He had been sick for a long time, and his passing had been peaceful, but I had grieved him in a way I hadn't expected. He was the only person in this family who had ever made me feel genuinely seen. The week before he died, he had held my hand and told me that he had taken care of something. He said I would find it when I needed it. He made me repeat the combination to the safe out loud, so he knew I had it memorized. I had not touched the safe since he passed. I don't know exactly why. Part of me was not ready. Part of me thought maybe I had misunderstood what he meant. But sitting in that kitchen, I finally stood up. Grandpa Walter's study was at the end of the main hallway, a small room lined with bookshelves that smelled like cedar and old paper. My parents had left it mostly unchanged since he passed. His desk was still there. His reading chair was still in the corner. The safe was behind the middle bookshelf on the left wall. A small, heavy, steel door safe that had always been there for as long as I could remember. I moved the shelf carefully. I entered the combination. My hands were steady, which surprised me. The door opened. Inside, on top of everything else, was a sealed white envelope. My name was written across the front in my grandfather's careful handwriting. Savannah. Just my name. Nothing else. Beneath it was a folded legal document, several pages thick, with a notary seal on the bottom of the last page. I picked up the envelope first. I sat down in my grandfather's reading chair and opened it. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, dated 14 months before he passed. He began by telling me that he had watched our family for a long time and that he was not blind to what he saw. He said he loved my father, but that love and fairness were not always the same thing, and that he had decided to make sure fairness was handled properly before he was no longer around to manage it. Then he told me about the house. The house I was sitting in, the house my grandfather had built with his own hands, and in which my family had lived for 30 years, had never been transferred to my parents. The deed had always remained in my grandfather's name, and in his will, updated quietly 14 months before his death with the help of a private attorney. He had left the house entirely to me, not to my father, not to my parents jointly, to me. He wrote that he had made this decision carefully and that it was not meant as a punishment to anyone. It was meant as a correction. He had watched my parents pour resources into my brother for years while I built my life without help, and he wanted to make sure that the most significant thing he had left to give went to the person he trusted most to use it wisely. At the bottom of the letter, He had written one final line. "You were always the one who paid attention, Savannah." I paid attention too. I sat in that chair and held the letter against my chest for a long time. Then I picked up the legal document, read through it twice, and took out my phone. I called a lawyer first thing the next morning. The attorney I reached was a woman named Claire Donovan, who specialized in estate and property law. I emailed her photographs of both the letter and the legal document that same morning. She called me back within 2 hours. "This is legitimate," she said. "The will amendment is properly notarized and witnessed. The deed transfer was never completed in your parents' names, which means legally your grandfather retained ownership until his death, and his estate documents direct it clearly to you." She paused briefly. "Savannah, this house belongs to you." She advised me on next steps. There were filings to complete, a formal notice to be issued, a process to follow. She offered to handle all of it. 3 days later, on a Friday afternoon, Claire Donovan arrived at the house. I was with her. My mother answered the door in her weekend clothes, holding a cup of tea, looking mildly confused by the unfamiliar car in the driveway. Tyler was visible. In the background, sitting on the couch. "Mrs. Reed," Claire said, introducing herself with calm professionalism. "I'm an estate attorney. I'm here regarding the property at this address, and its transfer under the estate of Walter Reed. May we come in?" My mother's eyes moved to me. I said nothing. I simply waited. We sat in the living room of the house my grandfather built, the house I now legally owned. Claire placed documents on the coffee table and walked my mother through them methodically. The will amendment, the deed status, the formal notification of transfer. Tyler came in from the other room halfway through and stood in the doorway. My mother did not speak for a long time after Claire finished. She picked up the documents and turned them over in her hands as though looking at them from a different angle might change what they said. Then I watched her hands begin to shake. Not dramatically, just slightly. That quiet trembling that happens when something large and structural shifts beneath a person all at once, and there is nothing they can do to stop it. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I know," I said. She looked at me. "Walter never told us." "He told me," I said. Before he passed, Tyler started to say something from the doorway. Then he stopped. My mother set the documents down. She looked at the room around her, the walls, the furniture, the house she had lived in for 30 years, as though seeing it differently for the first time. Claire gave her a timeline for the formal transfer process and left her contact information. Then she excused herself to wait by the car. I sat across from my mother in that living room for a moment longer. She was not a cruel woman. She never had been. But she had made choices for 30 years that added up to something, and my grandfather had seen those choices clearly, and he had responded to them in the only language that could not be argued with. "I'm not asking you to leave," I told her. "That's not why I'm here today." She looked up at me. "I'm here because Grandpa wanted me to know what he left me, and I think he also wanted you to know that he saw everything." She didn't answer, but her eyes filled with tears. The transfer was completed 6 weeks later. I have not made any decisions about the house that I am not ready to make. That is something I am taking my time with, the way my grandfather always told me to take my time with things that matter. My mother called me 2 weeks after that Friday afternoon. She did not apologize directly. She said she had been thinking. She said she hadn't realized how things had looked from where I was standing. I told her I appreciated the call, and I meant it. Some things don't get fixed quickly, but some things do get corrected. My grandfather spent his life watching quietly. He never raised his voice. He never started arguments. He just paid attention to who was working, to who was struggling, to who was being seen, and who was being passed over. And then, in the most permanent way available to him, he made it right. People often believe that the loudest voice in a family holds the most power. But my grandfather understood something most people miss. Real power is patient. It waits. It documents itself carefully. And when the Time comes, it doesn't argue. It just opens a door.